Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, in late 2016, soon after the presidential election of that year, there was a significant portion of the political left that began referring to itself as the resistance. Apparently, these people were bent on fighting whatever the new president might try to do, only because of who the new president was. There were signs in yards. There were people who painted their garage door with the resistance on the garage door. They weren't arguing against specific policies. They weren't making a rational effort to win support for their side. They were just trying to throw sand in the gears of the executive branch and interfere with how the government serves the people. One senator on the floor of the Senate said the resistance starts here. Now, they did it while trying to cloak themselves in maybe the compelling language of the resistance, as if they were, in their minds, they were starring in a World War II movie, Casablanca, where the resistance was the heroes, as they were all over World War II. The damage the resistance was willing to do to the executive branch of our government was bad enough. On the floor of the Senate, virtually every nominee the president nominated, the minority insisted on 30 hours of debate. Finally had to change that rule to 2 hours of debate, which those in the majority now know is a big enough challenge without 30 hours of debate. And I think the average time used was closer to 20 minutes during that 30 hours than 30 hours. But the 30 hours still had to be set aside. No other business could occur. People were nominated early on for ambassadors to countries, for instance, that they eventually got to serve 1 year in, because that resistance element appeared right here as well. Then a group of political activists began to insist that we degrade the legislative branch as well, trying to change the Senate to get rid of the motion to proceed. And frankly, ever since Democrats got control of the Senate by the smallest margin possible, there's been a constant discussion of why we should change that rule. Of course, many of us understand the so-called filibuster rule is what makes the Senate. President Biden said when he was a senator, quote, at its core, the filibuster is not about stopping a nominee or a bill. It's about compromise and moderation, end the quote that he made at the time that I agree with now. Many of the people who've been calling to end the filibuster changed their tune, not because something changed in America, because they're now in charge. And without the filibuster, we'd see wild swings in policy that different parties would take control of a majority of the Senate, and we see that constantly in the House now. A lot of bills pass. Very few of them get to the president's desk. When the other party gets in control, they pass bills that reverse what the earlier majority passes, and frankly, very few of them get to the president's desk either, because the Senate has to take a little more time to think about what direction the country really wants to go in. In the last 20 years or so, complete control has happened 4 times, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. That's a lot of time for the pendulum to swing and the potential for bad ideas to become law without something to make us think about that before we head in that direction. At a time of razor-thin margins in the House and Senate, activists should be extra careful about getting rid of institutional guardrails. Their efforts have failed so far because there aren't enough senators from both parties who are willing to make that change, but that doesn't mean they won't keep trying. In fact, I'm confident we'll continue to hear that, and I'm also confident their position will change as soon as they are in the minority and don't get what they want. This brings us to the disappointing effort we've seen to damage the third branch of government, the judiciary. For more than a year, we've seen some people on the left try to apply political pressure on the court to rule in a particular way. The senator from Utah just gave us an example of that. I'm going to repeat it. It's probably worth repeating. In March of 2020, The Democratic leader of the Senate spoke to a crowd in front of the Supreme Court building, and he said, quote, "I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price." Now, what would that possibly mean? If you're in the Senate, you've got a lifetime job. I mean, if you're in the Supreme Court, you've got a lifetime job. So the price clearly was not losing your job. What price was the Democratic leader suggesting and saying on the steps of the Supreme Court you'd have to pay? And this is while the court was inside hearing arguments on the case. And the leader added, "You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions." That kind of language has no place and really no legitimate purpose. This is not the kind of language that we need to use. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have talked about introduced legislation to add new judges to the court, to pack the court. Judges should rule based on the law, not on their partisan allegiance. That's not a new idea, but countries rarely manage to put it into practice. The American judicial system became the envy of the world precisely because of its independence. Renowned historian of the American Revolution, Gordon Wood, has described it as the creation of judges who are, quote, "agents of the sovereign people, somehow equal in authority with the legislators and executives." An independent judiciary is a critical element of the unique balance of power the Constitution created. Justices have frequently ruled against presidents and parties that put them on the court. Some of them, of the most prominent politically sensitive Supreme Court cases in history, have involved judges ruling against the parties that put them in power, including the U.S. versus Nixon in 1974, and Harry Truman, whose desk is put his name on the desk that I'm speaking from, would certainly have preferred not to lose the so-called steel seizure case of Youngstown Steel and Tube versus Sawyer, but he accepted it without threatening any of the judges, without plotting to increase the size of the court, even though the vote against it by, for instance, Fred Vinson, the Chief Justice, who'd been his Secretary of the Treasury and lifelong in terms of Senate service, friend, and his nominee to be the Chief Justice voted the other way. The supporters of these changes are calling very loudly, but just like the damage that they sought with their resistance of the executive branch, their efforts to break the Senate, they could do lasting, even permanent damage to the judiciary. Once the court's been clearly politicized, it would be hard to ever bring it back. I'm concerned about the anti-institutional fervor we see going on today. I hope it does not produce the stated results and goals. I yield back.